Welcome to the solocast of Firecode Tech. In these episodes, it's just going to be me, your host, Gus Gagliardi. There's going to be a range of topics, but I'm going to talk about specific technologies, installation standards, codes and how they work, as well as some other interesting topics that don't neatly fit inside of the context of a normal interview. So this is the first solocast, and I just want to give everybody an update on what's been going on with the podcast, how I've been doing. We're coming up on our first year with Firecode Tech, and I'm really excited because there's been so much growth and good feedback from the community. I got my PE last October. I had passed almost a year before last October in acquiring my experience and in the application process. It took almost another year for me to get the application. I don't know when this episode will come out, but I have some really stellar guests coming up soon. A couple professors that I have been waiting to talk to, as well as some really interesting guests from the fire and life safety industry. So I'm excited to share those. Anyways, let's get to the episode content for the solo cast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about duct detectors. I wanted to talk about duct detectors because I always sense a lot of confusion about them, generally from mechanical engineers or from also fire protection engineers. A lot of times we'll get it mixed up, duct detectors. So I wanted to narrow in on this specific technology and talk about the codes and standards surrounding it, some of the common pro tips for dealing with some of these devices. So I just wanted to explore the topic. Let's get into it. By the way, if you're enjoying these episodes, you can go to patreon.com/firecodetech, and for the price of a cup of coffee, you can get an extra 2 of these episodes a month. You'll be supporting the podcast and allowing me to do more and put out more content. So go sign up if this is something you're interested in. So with duct detectors, it's a good starting place. One of my mentors, Leanne, always, anytime we talk about a code or a topic, she says, got to start with the applicable codes and standards and what those look like. So if you're in the United States, that's probably a good preface for everything, almost everything I put out. This is through the lens of somebody who's working in the construction industry in the U.S. If you're in the United States and you're working with the international family of codes, the International Building Code, and International Mechanical Code, etc., you're going to be using International Mechanical Code by and large to determine when and where you need to locate duct detectors. I'll go over the code section a little bit just as a baseline. Anytime you are using the International Mechanical Code, unless you get into a air handling unit with a particularly large CFM that it's rated for, you're just going to be putting duct detectors in the return side. So I add this caveat because if you are working on government jobs, like the company I work for works on a number of government jobs, and so if you're working on a job that complies with UFC, you are going to be using NFPA 90A. Also, that means that you're going to be locating your duct detector in the supply side duct. That's a common misconception that I see that trips people up, because in some instances, if you're using NF90A and the International Mechanical Code, you can get tripped up. So let's start out with the code section in the International Mechanical Code. I'm using the 2015 version. I'm going to start out with 606.2 in IMC. Chapter 6 is duct systems. 606.2 is where required. And it says, smoke detectors shall be installed where indicated in sections 606.2.1 through 606.2.3. Basically, there is a list of conditions in which, if you meet these conditions, then you will be required to have a duct detector in your HVAC system. And to add on to that, there are some exceptions in which you can kind of put a caveat on the requirement for the need of a duct detector. So 606.2.1 says return air systems, and the passage is smoke detectors shall be installed in the return air systems with a design capacity greater than 2000 CFM. This is usually what everybody remembers. 2000 CFM is the threshold, and but they don't quite remember where or how these duct detectors are supposed to be located. And then the passage goes on to describe this a little bit more. It says, in the return air duct or plenum, upstream of any filters, exhaust air connections, outdoor air connections, or decontamination equipment and appliances. A very powerful exception is right below, and it basically states that smoke detectors are not required in the return air, where all portions of the building served by the air distribution system are protected by area smoke detectors connected to the fire alarm system in accordance with the IFC. The area smoke detection system shall comply with Section 606.4. There's not too many instances in the vanilla building code in which you need area smoke detection. This is one of those instances. I am not a huge fan of area smoke detection, but there are situations in which it can't be avoided due to ceiling plenum height or physical construction of a mechanical unit. There can be situations in which you can't physically get a duct detector in a unit or in a return duct. So in some instances, there are no ways to get around having area smoke detection when you have a system, a HVAC system that has the design capacity greater than 2000 CFM and is not separated. If you forget where this is located, always remember International Mechanical Code, and then if you have a searchable document, I would always search detector, and usually you can get to 606 pretty fast. So the other most common exception to the rule of when you need smoke detectors, I missed it up at the top, but it says smoke detectors shall not be required where air distribution systems are incapable of spreading smoke beyond the enclosing walls, floors, ceilings of the room or space in which the smoke is generated. This is a great exception. If you have a large unit that is just dumping air into a space, like a big warehouse space, or for the company that I work for, we have hangars in which we're dumping large volumes of air in, but it's just serving one space. You don't need a duct detector. However, I will say, as a cautionary tale, there are jurisdictions that don't recognize this provision. I was working in California on a job. Late in the design period, I got bit on, not having duct detectors in, that would normally be omitted with this provision. So it's worth noting that, check your local ordinances. If you're in California, of course, you can just kind of throw the standard International Mechanical Code out the door, and you need to read the code like you've never, designed a specific system application before. So it's worth noting that a duct detector is a supervisory signal, so this is not an alarm condition. There is some really interesting information about the supervision condition for duct detectors in 606.4.1. Says the duct smoke detector shall be connected to a fire alarm system where a fire alarm is required by 907.2 of the International Fire Code. So 907 in the building code and in the fire code are the fire alarm chapters. So basically this points you to how you determine where a fire alarm system is required, and so this code section is saying if you're required to have a fire alarm system and you have a duct detector, you need to have a supervisory condition when the duct detector is activated. So, and then there's some interesting exceptions below. Reading this, it's kind of interesting. It says the supervisory signal at a constantly attended location is not required where the duct smoke detector activates the building's alarm indicating appliances. Yeah, I've never used this provision. That's kind of interesting. Generally, if you have a fire alarm system, it's monitored. And so I guess this is a way you could short circuit that. And then exception number 2 is in occupancy is not required to be equipped with fire alarm system actuation of a smoke detector shall activate a visible and audible signal in an approved location. Duct smoke detection trouble conditions shall activate visible or audible signal in an approved location and shall be identified as a duct detector trouble. So basically, this is another unique provision for a building that is not required to have a fire alarm system, but is required by the IMC to have a duct detector. Yeah, I imagine there's some specific use cases in which you would see this, but I've not had any experience with buildings with this unique configuration. Usually if a building's that small, they're not going to require that much air. Yeah, I guess there's some unique cases which I might not be aware of, but so that wraps up our first solocast episode of Fire Code Tech. Really excited about these. Don't forget, If you like these and you want to hear a couple more of these a month, go check out patreon.com/firecodetech. The first episode on the Patreon is another similar length of exposition on duct detectors. So if you enjoyed this little dive into duct detectors, then there's more of that where you can find on patreon.com/firecodetech. So check it out. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.